All right. Good evening, Colorado residents. My name is Amy Bach, and I am so pleased to be with you tonight. I'm sorry for the circumstances that have compelled you to have to sign on to something like this, but I'm so pleased to be able to bring our nonprofit organization's unique information, perspectives, and support to you and your friends and neighbors in your community as you um, are taking your early steps on your road to recovering from the devastating wildfires that swept through your beautiful state. I am based in California, in the Bay Area, and of course, we're no stranger to wildfires this year either. So although COVID has been a very challenging wild card for all of us, we have been able to pivot and bring you virtual information, and we will be continuing to do that until it's safe for us to have in-person events. So please do stay with us. We will be recording. We're recording tonight's Q&A, and you will be able to go back and watch it through a free link from our website if you missed something or something wasn't clear and you want to hear it again. A little bit about United Policyholders. We are what's called a 501c3. That just means that we're a tax exempt charity, and the government has recognized that. And we have been around since 1991, so we are about to start our 30th year of service, and we're very proud. And this year, as challenging as it's been, has been very rewarding for us because it feels good to be able to continue bringing people in your situation information that we normally would be bringing to you in a church hall or a gym or a public building. So this is our way of staying the course with you, and we hope it works for you. We're not for profit, not for sale, meaning we don't take money from insurance companies, and our track record is of improving disaster recovery by empowering you, the insured, people who have paid money for insurance protection. You've had a loss, you need every dime of that protection. We're here to help you get that. We're funded by donations and grants. We have a volunteer corps, and that includes people who have either personal or professional expertise in disaster recovery and insurance. And what we're bringing you here tonight is building on what we brought at our earlier workshop last week. And just a little bit of fine print. We've got some guests, experts to help answer your questions tonight. The workshop that the orientation workshop was just taught by our staff. And now we're bringing in some of our professional expert volunteers to supplement the chops that we have and the knowledge that we have. But really tonight's workshop is intended to be information and general guidance only, not legal advice. So while we do have an attorney on our expert panel, he is here to give you information. We're not creating an attorney-client relationship between you and him or the other two experts. We're not creating a client professional relationship, but they are here as educators. So we very much recommend that if you come out of tonight and feel like you really need, you want one-on-one professional guidance, we really encourage you to get it. But again, our organization is a conduit, a nonprofit, and we are here because you have paid for good claim service and coverage, and we want to make sure you get that. And we also have a lot of knowledge about the kind of nuts and bolts of getting through a wildfire recovery. We run 3 programs. Tonight's program is brought to you through our Roadmap to Recovery. And as I already mentioned, Team Up is my staff, myself, and the people that are helping run tonight's program, as well as the other staff members that keep our website up to date and perform different tasks so that we can be your voice and your advocate. in Colorado and wherever decisions are being made that affect you. We have government and nonprofit partners. We are working closely with Boulder County, Larimer County, and hopefully soon Grand County. And then we also have a guest on tonight's webinar who won't be speaking, but who is keeping an eye. And you heard from her at the orientation, Carrie Waite, who is a Colorado resident who is on United Policyholders team as both a previous catastrophic loss survivor and also as a part-time staff person with us on the ground in Colorado for the 2020 wildfire roadmap to recovery, through which we're bringing you tonight's forum. So the fellows that I recruited for tonight are, two of them are public adjusters, one of them is a lawyer. They are all work in Colorado. That's where they make their living. They are experts in the rules of the claim road in Colorado, as well as the laws in your state. That's me. I've been dedicated to advancing the interests of insurance policyholders since shortly after I got out of college in 1984. I co-wrote that this little yellow book that you may have seen, the Disaster Recovery Handbook. And I co-founded United Policyholders, and I feel very strongly that you are entitled to the peace of mind and the financial security that you paid for. And so I'm very proud to be able to bring you 3 experts tonight to make sure that happens. One of them is Scott DeLuise. Scott is a public adjuster. He's waving. Let's see if I can't, yeah, that's not gonna work. I can unshare my screen here for a minute so you can get a good look at Scott. There we go. Scott is I believe a lifetime resident of Colorado. Is that right, Scott?
5 generations.
5 generations. And then we've got Chris Rockers. Chris is also a public adjuster, also based in Colorado. I don't know if you're a Colorado lifer, Chris.
Minnesota transplant.
All right, well, at least you're not from California, so that probably counts a lot with people.
Here.
And thank you so much for your time and expertise, Chris. You've been a great friend. Tom Henderson, an attorney with Berg Simpson. Tom, you seem like you've been in Colorado for quite some time. I've certainly always known you as a Colorado lawyer. Welcome and thank you.
Thank you. I came out here to go to law school at DU and met my wife, who then was a school teacher and never left. So raised my family here. All is good.
Well, thank you again for sharing your expertise on tonight's program. So, and all 3 of these gentlemen have given us their, I don't know if these are their cell phone numbers or what, but they've generously agreed for me to put them up on the screen for you. And they welcome follow-up questions if you have them. So we're just gonna do a little bit of review from our orientation. There's a picture of a workshop that we did. We worked 4 fires in Colorado in the past, in 2010, 2012, 2013, 2014. And at the end of helping people get on a pretty good road to being able to replace their homes and getting back in a replacement home, we learned about a lot of weaknesses in the law that we thought needed some fixing, so that people like you who would go through this again in the future would get the benefit of some of the solutions that we tried to bring for people who had gone through it in the past. I think it's still a work in progress, and we're going to talk about that a little bit as we go tonight. But there are some protections you have that are because of the legislative work we did with our partners, including Scott and Tom and Chris. So here's the website for, if you live in Grand County, the website that the county has set up for you to get ongoing updates and information. In Boulder, this is the link to the site that Boulder County has set up. And then if you don't know, Gary Sanfason, he's a public servant who has deep expertise in wildfire recovery and is helping shepherd along the recovery in Boulder County. In Larimer, Lori Hodges was with us on our orientation webinar, and this is the website for the resources that Larimer is coordinating for wildfire impacted households in that county. This is the library that our organization has made available to all of you. And all three of the experts that are on tonight have contributed information to that library and will continue to if questions come up that we haven't already answered. There's that yellow book. If you would like a copy of it, you email info@uphelp.org, although we do have a number of those books still available thanks to a donation from both Chris and Scott to make sure that those books are readily available to you in Colorado. So if you want one, just email info@uphelp.org and we will make sure that one of those books gets to you either in the mail or a drop off. And it's a good one if you're not really comfortable with the internet, and if you it's got a good section on recreating contents inventory. So just to recap, sources of support and help out there in Colorado, obviously us, the Department of Insurance in Colorado. You have a pretty pro-consumer insurance commissioner. If you run into a problem with your insurance company, he's a friend, but he has a pretty small staff. And so that, that's a place to go if you want, let's say if you're having trouble getting a copy of your policy, for example, or if you have asked to get a new adjuster assigned and you can't seem to reach anyone at the company, you can call the Department of Insurance in Colorado and ask them to help you with that communication. Previous wildfire survivors, we have lots of them and in Colorado, and in the new year, we will be bringing you access to what we call the Survivor to Survivor Forum, where people can ask questions of somebody who's been there, done that, where you'll be have the opportunity to speak with people who've already recovered from a previous wildfire. Other sources obviously are your insurance policy and the insurance company that is supposed to be cooperating with you and making your life easier, not harder. Reputable professionals, such as the ones we've brought you tonight. And then as well, air quality professionals, if you have a partial loss, and then construction professionals also, just like with everything, just because you've gone through a disaster doesn't mean everybody's going to be totally nice to you and not try to cheat you. So it is just as important now as ever that you check references before you hire any professionals at all. And then, of course, your elected officials should be a source of help. Here's the email address for your insurance department. There's their, they have a toll-free number outside of the Denver metro area. And again, they are not going to be, they're not the equivalent of hiring a professional claim adjuster or hiring a lawyer if you have a really stubborn problem and our resources and self-help isn't getting you where you need to go, but they will help you with some basic issues. And absolutely, if you're having trouble with your insurance company, we encourage you to put that information in writing to the Department of Insurance and let them know that your insurance company is behaving badly or dragging their feet. Okay, we're all going to take a deep breath and just remind ourselves that insurance is a vehicle to get you back as close as possible to where you were before your loss, but it won't drive itself. Obviously, the reason that there is an organization called United Policyholders is because people do sometimes have problems with their insurance claims especially when there are large dollars at stake. And settling a total loss insurance claim is very time consuming and it's not for everyone. So while we will give you everything we can to help you be that strong negotiator on your own behalf, we want you to be realistic about your situation, and know that that your adjuster may be friendly. The adjuster the insurance company sends out may be friendly, but they're not your friend. They are a trained negotiator. They have a job. And your financial interests and theirs are not the same. They want to minimize how much they pay on your claim. You want to maximize how much, right? So remember that all those ads you've been watching your whole life and those backdrops at your kid's softball game, advertising for an insurance company that says it's going to be your good neighbor and your friend, those are ads, right? So you are in a situation where you've had a loss and you need to move forward. Okay, so let's get into the questions. We talked during the orientation about how important it is to be familiar with your policy, not your neighbor's policy, but yours. And that means that you need the declarations page and all the endorsements and riders. And I encourage you, if you have it handy, to have it with you during tonight's program and any future program you may sit in on, so you can follow along with the information. And we're going to start with a question about one of the first things that people need help with, which is debris removal and figuring out how much money do they have in their insurance for debris removal. All right. So we got a question in: does each coverage, A and B, that would be your dwelling and your contents, A and B, do they each have their own, I'm just going to go, there we go. Do they each have their own category of debris removal coverage available? So I'm going to start with Scott. Scott, for a typical dwelling policy, is there a separate amount of debris removal coverage benefits available for the dwelling and for the other structures, or is the debris removal generally a lump sum?
Well, this must be the daily double, huh? The answer to the question is it depends on your policy, of course, but just as the debris from your house must be removed from your property, so must the debris from your contents. What we've typically found is that you do have debris removal coverage over and above your policy limits of 5%, and that should cover debris removal for both your contents and your dwelling. But you got to read your policy.
Okay. Chris or Tom, anything you'd like to add in terms of figuring out how many dollars are available to you to cover the cost of your debris removal?
I think what Scott said is accurate. Typically it's 5%, and it does apply to coverage A, the dwelling, coverage B, the other structures, and personal property, if you exceed that limit. So it's in addition to the coverage limit. It's not automatic. You must first exceed the limits for it to kick in.
Okay.
And the only thing that I would add to Scott and Chris's points is really to piggyback on what Chris just said, which is one of the obligations that the insurance company has is to explain to you all of the benefits available under the policy. Have them, my suggestion is you have them walk you through your policy. Where are all the different buckets, so to speak, where you can find coverage? Don't let the insurance company try to convince you that the debris removal coverage is capped at what the limits are that are stated there. For example, on a screen share there, coverage A dwelling at 300, coverage B the 30,100, etc. Because as Scott and Chris both said, most policies include an additional coverage. In fact, it's oftentimes phrased as an additional coverage or a supplemental coverage that is available, as Chris said. If you max out your other coverage, then you can tap into that extra coverage. But don't allow the insurance company to look you in the eye and say, it's $300,000, that's all there is, that's all there ever will be. Of course, it's subject to whatever the verbiage in the policy is.
So So, okay, so we often tell people, do your own math. It's your asset. You have the biggest stake in making sure it gets valued properly, right? But policy, insurance policy math can be very confusing. So, for example, you guys talked about debris removal being 5% of typically across the board. But is that 5% you take, let's say, is of the adjusted limit, meaning you see in this declaration page example, this person has a limited home replacement cost endorsement that gave them an extra 150%, right? So their coverage A dwelling limit got adjusted, right? So does the debris removal, the amount of debris removal benefits that it's available to the person, is it 5% of the 300,000 that's on this example, or is it 5% of the 300,000 adjusted to 150%?
Scott, you want it?
I'll take that. The policies typically limit the 5% debris removal to the base. We call it the base limit, which is the 300,200. Again, sometimes there are extensions in the policy that allow that to happen, but those are super deluxe, rare policies. I've seen it, but it doesn't happen very often.
Okay.
And I agree. I believe what typically happens is it refers back to the amount on the declaration pages, not the extended limit, but the policy will dictate.
Okay.
And my only addition to that is, and this is a technique that I preach nonstop, which is what Scott and Chris just said is, it depends on what the language in the policy is. So the technique is ask for the full amount. And then if the adjuster says, no, that's not the way it works, have your policy out and have the adjuster point to you, or if you're doing it by Zoom or remotely, have the adjuster point to you where in the policy it says what the adjuster says is how they're interpreting the policy. You're going to hear me say that a lot. That's a very, very important technique, because you'll be shocked at the number of times the adjuster cannot point to any provision in the policy that backs up what they're telling you.
So this is a really critical point. I think all three of these experts will agree with this idea that these are your assets, right? You have the biggest stake in making sure that they get properly valued and that your policy limits get paid in full. Well, does every adjuster have the same level of training, or are some pretty green? Let's start with you on that, Chris. Can you count on the adjuster that the company sends out to really know how to value your loss, or how do you see that?
Well, oftentimes there will be a number of different consultants that carriers send out. Some handle the dwelling portion, some handle the contents portion. Sometimes a carrier will bring out a building consultant to work with the adjuster. And you're right, Amy. I mean, oftentimes there are some relatively young, inexperienced adjusters that are sent out by the carriers to assist. And it's beneficial for the homeowner certainly to have reviewed their policy and kind of understand it, and ask the questions of that adjuster, communicate in writing. But we've seen that oftentimes adjusters change and multiple adjusters become involved on the same claim, and that can be somewhat difficult and problematic. But the adjuster is the individual that you're going to trust, or that you want to trust. And oftentimes it is, as you said, a very long process, and it's important to communicate in writing as often as you can.
Scott, you're already out there handling some of these losses. Are you seeing any patterns? I mean, this was in terms of the level of expertise of the adjusters that insurers are sending out. I mean, this was a big year for wildfires. So, thousands in California and over 1,000 in Colorado. So what are you seeing out there with the adjusters that the companies are sending out?
Mostly we're finding adjusters that are what we call stormtroopers. These are adjusters that come up from Texas, California. Uh, Typically, they don't know Colorado. They don't know Colorado law. They don't know pricing in Colorado. Gary Sanfason and I were exchanging emails earlier. Some of these guys think that replacement costs are, $200 a square foot. That wasn't even the case in the 4 Mile Canyon fire. They started at $300 a square foot, and now they're $500, $600 a square foot. So don't believe a word your adjuster tells you when it comes to evaluations of property. They typically use Xactimate, which is their factory, not factory, but their chosen software. And that software has absolutely unreliable pricing models for Colorado. Totally unrealistic.
Okay, so Tom, are there any regulations or laws in California that say that relate to adjuster accountability, adjuster turnover? California has a law that says if the company rotates more than I think it's more than 6 adjusters through in a 6-month period, the homeowner has to get a status report so that they don't have to sort of start from scratch every time a new adjuster comes. Is there any regulation in terms of the adjuster that the company sends out, how many there can be?
Short answer, no. Don't we all wish here in Colorado? But no, it's very common that there's a seemingly nonstop revolving door of adjusters. But unfortunately, no, we don't have any regulation or ability to try to insist that the insurance company stop the revolving door.
Okay, so we'll be taking notes on ideas for legislation, but that's not going to help you guys in the here and now. So I'm going to go back to one more question because I want to pick up on something that Scott mentioned before we get to some of the questions people are asking live. If you guys have questions, you can type them in the Q&A box. And we will be getting to them as quick as we can. So Scott, you mentioned something called Xactimate, following up on my comment that since you, the homeowner, have the biggest stake in making sure that your destroyed or damaged assets are properly valued and that your insurer pay you a fair amount on those. How does the insurance company typically go about valuing a destroyed dwelling?
Well, somebody that the insurance company brings in will typically do it, or the adjuster will do it himself. Xactimate is on residential claims in Colorado, Xactimate has only been a guideline. We've had multi-million-dollar losses where a contractor, a local contractor on the back of a napkin can do a more accurate estimate of the cost to replace a house than Xactimate can. And it's because Xactimate is driven by, quote, local pricing. And if contractors don't put local pricing into the Xactimate model, it's going to come up with inadequate pricing. And I'm sure Chris and I have torn our hair out over this, and it's ended up in many a lawsuit that Tom has handled, where the insurance company just has not accurately estimated the cost to replace the property that's burned. And you have to be an advocate for yourself. You have to get a local contractor that knows how to price it. You can hire a public adjuster that knows how to price it. But you have to be an advocate for yourself. You cannot rely on the insurance company to accurately price your dwelling or your contents. They'll do it for you. They're more than happy to do it for you. I wonder why.
So just another quick note on Xactimate. So it's software. It's a computer program. We have 2 articles about it on our website, Xactimate Demystified. And if you want to look up any more about it, it starts with an Xactimate. But it's just a tool, as you heard Scott say. And so typically an adjuster will base what they offer you on your dwelling on an Xactimate estimate. And they often look pretty impressive because they're like an inch thick. They have a million light items. They look fancy, but it's just really just a glorified template with numbers put in. And like everything else with software, people say garbage in, garbage out. Not that the numbers are necessarily wrong in there. It's just that unless the adjuster really knows what they're doing and they manually override some of the default pricing, they're not going to get accurate prices for Colorado. And typically it's going to skew low. It's typically going to be more like a tract home type pricing, which generally is going to be way off for the types of homes that most of you lost, and that were mostly custom homes. And so Chris, how many times would you say you go out on a loss and these days, and the adjuster has based their dwelling offer on Xactimate?
Quite often. I mean, that's typically what they utilize. But we believe that it's in the best interest of the insureds to assess their own damages and determine what those damages are. The carrier is going to do whatever it is that they have internally for their procedures, but it's your claim, it's your loss. I think what you had on the screen earlier, Amy, is you want to have a reputable contractor assess and tell you what it's going to cost to rebuild your home. That's the basis of your claim. And the carrier must consider what it is that you guys submit from your general contractor as the basis to resolve the claim. So they may have an Xactimate estimate, but that is not the end all. It's something that the carriers use. But
Yeah.
we believe it's best for the homeowners to establish what their own damages are.
And
Hey,
Yeah,
Amy,
go
let me, if you don't mind, let me
Sure.
chime in there. What Chris and Scott are saying is critical. I'm a lawyer that, if necessary, will sue the insurance company for bad faith. One of the things that needs to be done for any policyholder is to go out and obtain written documentation that supports their claim, your claim, and send that to the insurance company. Because if the insurance company refuses to acknowledge that fact, which unfortunately does happen, then part of what is key for me in pursuing the bad faith case is to prove that they had the documents in their files that showed that their Xactimate estimate was a lowball. So absolutely go out, get a contractor that you would trust to come out and give an estimate as to here's what it would cost me today here where my home used to be to replace it. Not what some software developed where there are a lot of backdoor tweaks that the insurance company can and does make to try to lowball it.
Okay, so again, we're not trying to tell you tonight that you're going to get screwed and you better lawyer up. That is not the message I want you all to take away from this, right? We're here so that you can take your best shot at getting a good outcome, and so that you really understand the lay of the land. But what Tom was saying is like, it is not legal for an insurance company to offer you less than they owe you, right? That we call that lowballing. It's not legal. And Tom, I assume you've got that's sort of a big issue in a lot of your cases, yes?
Yes.
Okay, so we're trying to head all that off for you, right? Tom doesn't need business. That's not why he's here. He's here to share. I mean, well, I shouldn't say he doesn't expect it at this stage of your game, just being fairly early in your process. I'm sure you're not looking to run off and head to court. But the point is that we want you to know what the law is, because just like you've already heard, your adjuster may may actually have been selling shoes before the pandemic, and now they're an insurance adjuster, or they may be a really good experienced person, but you really have to trust but verify, because it's your asset. So if you know that you got an adjuster who's using a computer program, they're not a builder, you're going to want to get information from a builder so that you really do have a very clear idea of what you're entitled to. Okay, so let's get to some of the questions that were submitted first. And I'm going to ask Mark Dillman. Mark, if you can unmute yourself and read us question 11.
Sure. Thanks, Amy. So this one has a little bit of background, but it is interesting. So I'll go through this whole question here. How is it that the insurance company's premiums go down year over year for a car policy due to the recognition of the depreciation of the car, and the insurance premiums for a dwelling or house go up due to the recognition of appreciation of the dwelling or house? But when it comes time for the payout for the dwelling or house, the insurance company deploys, assigns, implements, or creates an actual cash value formula with depreciation rather than a market value formula that recognizes the appreciation of the dwelling or house. This goes against what they had learned from their university accounting classes and real estate market uses to determine the real value of a dwelling or house, called the market value equals what someone is willing to pay for it.
Okay, wow, that's a long question. I what I'm pulling out of that is, Chris, can you explain how depreciation comes into play when you're trying to get a fair settlement on your wildfire claim? Let's start with that, and anything else from that question that you can discern.
Yeah, in a nutshell, I think the simplest way is it's replacement cost less depreciation equals your actual cash value. And depreciation is often a factor of the age of the dwelling or the components or the possessions. So I know that there was a lot in that question as to market value and the like, but the reality of a claim right now, if you have replacement cost coverage, you want to determine what your replacement cost is and understand that the carriers is allowed or permitted per the policy to withhold certain funds and then release those. But the most important thing is to reach agreement on what the replacement cost is. And again, if it's on your dwelling, you want to determine those damages working with a reputable contractor or restoration contractor, depending upon what your damages are. So you know what your damages are. Depreciation, though, is based upon typically the age and the condition of the home.
Scott, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think I can tie that into a question that came up on the chat from Susan Schneider. Our house burned to the ground on Labor Day. The adjuster contacted us, but said he didn't think he needed to come to the site because we did such a great job with before and after pictures. We just got notice of our dwelling claim check being sent, but it's $50,000 less than our maximum base insured amount. Where do we go from here? This should connect the dots for you folks on the difference between a live, accurate estimate of replacement cost and how insurance companies use depreciation to pay less than the base limits even when you're underinsured, especially when you're underinsured. And I don't know that Susan is, it doesn't really make any difference, but if the $50,000 is calculated on an accurate estimate of damages, replacement damages, then that's what you get until you spend that $50,000. Our experience is that they're lowballing some of these estimates and then depreciating them below policy limits so they don't have to pay policy limits up front. We have 4 losses where that in fact is the case. So, you know, not enough detail for me here, but hopefully that'll kind of connect the dots with, you know, low replacement cost estimates, depreciation, and recovery.
Okay,
And let me, if I may, Amy, just chime in real quick. Market value almost always is not ever mentioned in an insurance policy. So it's a foreign concept to insurance, just as actual cash value, ACV, is a foreign concept to the appraisal, the real estate appraisal world. So don't confuse the two. As Chris said, actual cash value, which is what the insurance company is obligated to pay to you, no strings attached, is calculated by taking replacement costs, and then they depreciate. And then as Scott said, if you want to recover the so-called depreciation holdback, most companies will require that you either spend it or that you have committed that you're going to spend it, and then they may dribble you out some advances.
Tom, are there any laws or regulations in Colorado that are specific to how an insurance company, the timing of them paying replacement value once if they've applied depreciation and they paid actual cash value? Is there any law that says how much time they have to pay replacement value?
Unfortunately, Colorado does not, as some states do, Colorado does not have specific dates by which payments are to be made under the law. There are oftentimes provisions in the policy that say that we insurance company will make payment within X number of days after we reach agreement. So you're going to have to be dictated by what the policy says there.
Right. And so Chris and Scott, is it typically your experience on almost all your claims and losses in Colorado that the insurer will only pay ACV and until they've received proof of payment, proof of expenditures before they'll pay the replacement value above the actual cash value?
Well,
Yes,
sometimes-
unless the policy limits are met on an ACV basis. But one of the things that Tom said too is oftentimes they will issue an ACV payment and the policy may say you have up to 180 days to recover the holdback. So you need to be mindful of the terms and some of the deadlines that are in the policy as well. You can always get extensions, but that's why, again, it's very key to review the policy to know what some of those deadlines might be.
Yeah, Scott, is there a difference between when an insurance company applies a holdback for depreciation? Sometimes it's recoverable and sometimes it's not. Is that right?
Yes. You know, my experience is that sometimes with a good negotiator on your side, you can come to a settlement, especially if you're underinsured, you can come to a settlement on some of these extensions of coverages and the difference between RCV and ACV just by sitting down with them and negotiating. I mean, this is a big negotiation, a huge negotiation. That's all insurance companies do is negotiate.
Absolutely. Okay. So Mark, you want to read question 12?
So this question asks, our property was completely destroyed by the wildfire in Colorado, and it's our second home. We are underinsured. However, the loss of use part of our policy says actual loss sustained. Being our second home, how is this amount determined and calculated?
Okay, let's start. Let's go Chris and then Scott and then Tom.
You bet. So if it's a secondary home, you still have the opportunity to have used that. So now you've lost that. And again, it's just communications with the carrier to say, what are your options? And one of your options would be to perhaps rent a place that is in the mountains on a periodic basis. There's options to still place something there on that property on a permanent basis until the home might be rebuilt. So there are a number of options, and you have the loss of use coverage. And there could be, you might rent Airbnb or motel rooms. You need to establish what those costs might be and get confirmation from the carrier up front. You don't want to necessarily incur the cost without the commitment from the carrier that they'll reimburse you. But the ALE coverage typically is a cost that you incur and they'll reimburse you. But even on a secondary home, you do have the ability to find lodging and recoup those benefits.
Scott, anything to add there?
Yeah, without getting into the weeds, additional living expenses classified as a as incurred and an actual loss sustained. So what you have to do in order to receive those benefits is you actually have to find another place. We've had people rent motorhomes in lieu of getting a second replacement dwelling, especially when you can't find them. We've had insureds rent places in California on the beach. As long as your fair rental value in your new location is the same as the fair rental value at your existing home, that's what they owe. Furnished, like, kind, and quality. And I had an adjuster say to me the other day, well, we're not paying for vacation. Yes, you are, if that's what the insured wants to do, and the fair market value is the same as the house that he lost. So those are the kind of arguments, and when you get pushback from an insurance adjuster, and you know you're right, just stand your ground.
Okay, so Tom, anything to add there, or should we move to the next question?
Nope, nothing to
Okay.
add. They covered it.
All right, and just for all of you that are out there, one of the things people say to us is, please don't use the lingo. It's just, insurance lingo is so confusing, and we really understand that, and we do try to simplify. But insurance companies have a lot of processes that they've set up, and one of them is that they get to use the words that they choose a lot of the time. So some of them talk about loss of use benefits for your temporary rent. Some of them talk about additional living expenses. That's the way they describe that category of benefits. Some of them talk about temporary living expenses. But regardless of what label your insurance company puts on that bucket is either a set amount of money, or it is an amount of money that's available on a maximum on a time basis, how many months you get to use it. The bottom line is we really encourage you, when it comes to figuring out what expenses you have that are eligible for being reimbursed as additional living expense, temporary loss of use, go to our website, read up a little bit, look at the list. It is expenses that you are incurring because you have lost the use of the property. So it's not your mortgage because you had that expense already, but it's that temporary rent, it's the additional driving, etc. And what you're hearing from our experts is there is not just one way necessarily to calculate what the insurer owes you. So in the case of your second home, what were you renting it for, or what will it cost you to rent an equivalent place? And your policy language is important there. So let's go to Susan Schneider's question. Our place was a historic building, and most of the contents were antique or vintage. We're really confused about what's antique, vintage, how to value them, what sources to use, and should we even list them as such? So let's start with you, Chris, on this question of if something is an antique, are you putting it on your regular contents inventory? Are you calling it out specially? And how do you value it since it can't be replaced?
So many times it's dependent upon what type of coverage you have, what your limits are. And there are experts in Colorado. I think Colorado Art Restoration. Scott, you may recall, I think maybe it's Richard Bermude who's in Boulder. There are people that specialize in providing replacement costs for high-end items, custom items, but how you capture them is important, because sometimes, depending upon what your limits may be, how you describe certain things does impact how the carrier will look at it, whether it's paid on an ACV basis or replacement cost basis. But they're typically, people can get assistance in putting their personal property claim together, but there are experts that you might rely on as well if you have high-end items, because again, details are what you want as opposed to a generic listing, because you want to be able to support your replacement costs. And if the listing is generic and you have a high-end item, likely that will be questioned by the carrier. So again, what we say all along is it's your claim. You want to work cooperatively with the bloody carrier, but obligation is yours to submit your claim and support it. That's why you still want to put the inventory together as opposed to just giving a listing to the carrier and allow them to price it.
Yes, and Scott, I want to hear from you on this as well. But maybe we can fold in another question that sort of relates. And that is, can you address the lifestyle interviews that some adjusters can't call and do to address the personal property losses? And I think this is probably, there's a couple things in here, right? We're on the topic of contents inventory, right? We're on the topic of that category of benefits that you have to replace your stuff, right? The contents of your house, anything that would fall out if you were to turn it upside down and shake it. And the process of creating that inventory is something that you will find a lot of resources on our website to help you prepare that. That's something that if you don't want to do it, you can't do it. That's something that people like Scott and Chris do for their clients. That's part of their job. But if you're doing it yourself, we have samples galore to help you. But no matter what process you use, it's painstaking and it can be very painful because, of course, while your heart is trying to heal from your losses, part of that is forgetting, forgetting. A lot of wildfire survivors find themselves very forgetful. Their memory is not so good. So it is really hard to do that. And so you heard Chris talk about that there's the money in the details, right? The more things you list, the more you're going to get back, right? So we've got that established. But Scott, what are some of your recommended strategies for establishing values? And then if your insurer offers to send a content specialist out, should you work with them? What should you do?
Well, the question of a lifestyle interview is really interesting, and it's really a legal question, but the policy requires the policyholder to answer all questions that the insurance company may have so that they can properly investigate their claim. We have one client in Boulder who had to go through an EUO, an examination under oath, after their house burned down in a wildfire. That's outrageous. I mean, there's nothing no benefit to that, in my opinion, other than attempting to coerce the insured to say something that may jeopardize their claim. And as far as contents goes, yeah, the insurance company has the right to find out where you shop. If you shop at Walmart as opposed to Andreessen in Cherry Creek, yeah, there's a difference there, but it's incumbent upon you to let them know your lifestyle and how you live. I think if you tackle that up front with the adjuster, the lifestyle interview is going to be short, but they have the right to do it. It's in the policy.
Tom, anything you want to add there?
What I will add, so first of all, let me quickly hit on the antique question.
Yes.
It's not uncommon that insurance policies will have what we in the insurance world call sublimits, which is a smaller dollar amount, maximum amount you are allowed to make a claim for certain items, money, currency, stock certificates. Antiques is sometimes included in there. So just read your policy and make sure you know what's in there before you start calling stuff antiques. And to Scott and Chris's points, when you are completing your own personal property inventory, there really is not a need to call it an antique. You just give whatever a fair value would be for that item. And yes, it's sometimes hard, very hard to find something that's substantially equivalent, but give it your best shot. To the lifestyle question, as a lawyer, that kind of makes my skin crawl a little bit, but Scott's right. The insurance company does have the contractual right under the policy to ask you questions that are relevant to the adjustment of the claim. So they can't, in my opinion, in that situation, they can't ask you how much money do you have in your bank account. That's not relevant to a determination as to the value of the property that you've lost. But if you are someone who is making a claim for many very high-end high-end value items, but it looks like you would not be a person who would have those items, the insurance company is going to sniff around a lot because they're going to think that there's fraud involved. Trust me, they're never going to ask if you had high-end items and you're turning in prices for a cheaper version of it.
Yeah, I mean, this is the classic example for me, after the Oakland fire, 1991, an African-American family came to us and said, what the insurance company doesn't believe that we bought our towels at Dillard's or some fancy store. And, obviously they were making a judgment about that. Oh, well, and I've actually heard adjusters say, oh yeah, sure. After disasters, everybody says they shopped at Saks Fifth Avenue and that kind of thing. So, I mean, I think what I want everyone to take away from all these answers is it's not right that you have to do these itemized inventories when everything that you had and that was insured is gone, because I mean, the logic is that you paid a certain amount for your coverage, C on all your contents, everything is gone, and there's a very strong logic that says that the insurer should just cut you a check for the full amount of your contents benefits. But they have written their policy contracts so that they don't have that obligation. And in California, we've made a lot of headway. We've had so many wildfires, and there are so many really engaged people in your situation who came out on the other side and said, I really would like to make this process easier for the next generation. And so together we have made some inroads in getting insurance companies to relax the requirement that you list every salt and pepper shaker and every bottle of aspirin and feminine hygiene product and all that sort of humiliating nonsense that you have to do. And in fact, in Colorado, the insurer is supposed to, by law, offer you 30% of your contents benefits without you having to do the itemization. The problem is that, of course, we want to see you get 100% of your contents limits, not 30. So
a total loss.
What's that?
On a total loss.
On a total loss. So did you want to add anything, Chris, to this discussion about best practices for presenting for valuing items on your contents inventory and presenting your contents inventory?
Yeah, so again, I think that this is probably one of the more difficult portions of a claim, because it does require a significant amount of time and detail, and it's to the insured's benefit to try to capture as accurately and as thoroughly as possible what you lost. And one of the more tedious requirements is that every entry must have an approximate age. So there are ways that you can put your inventory together, but this is so important to the overall claim and what you recover, is that you need to put time in up front, whether it's a room by room basis, and work with family members and the like. And again, this is to be a cooperative process with the carrier. They too need to understand that your life has been turned upside down, but it is also your obligation. So it is your claim, and you will want to devote the necessary time to put together a thorough, detailed inventory. And it is quite time consuming, as Amy, as you shared. It can be difficult for people to try to recall what it is that they lost and all the memories and the like. But the personal property portions of the claim are extremely difficult, and there is no real shortcut. There are, there's assistance that's out there, but it's a difficult process on every bloody claim.
And I want to commit to those of you who tuned in tonight that in the new year, we will be hosting a workshop just focused on contents claims and helping you get your contents claim put together. Tom, what is the typical policy deadline that you see in Colorado policies for people to complete and submit their contents inventory?
Well, usually there is not a specific deadline, but obviously it's in the policyholder. It's in your best interest to try to put that together as reasonably quickly as you can, because the insurance company is probably going to sit back and wait for you to provide them with that information before they begin adjusting the claim. And so it's important that you not let it languish off to the side, but that you do provide it to them in as quickly as you possibly can. Chris is right, and you know, I have had more people cry on my shoulder in my 33 years of doing this about contents inventories than anything else, because it's traumatic. You're having to go through and remember all the things that you have lost that you're never going to see again. And that is traumatic. And the insurance company does need to be sympathetic to that. But take your time, but make sure you get it right.
And Scott,
may have-
is it's common common that people can add and supplement their contents list as they remember things. Anything you want to add on that?
No, I agree with that 100%. In fact, it's almost impossible with the traumatic loss of your home that you can remember things. It's like an automobile accident where you can't remember the accident itself. This is very traumatic for some people, but the insurance companies really aren't sensitive to that. Remember, to them, it's all about money. To you, it's your home. And they treat you that way, not because they're being malicious, but because they can. And that's how they've been taught. It's horrible. And I can assure you, I remember going through the Homeowner Reformation Act in 2013 with Amy, and we were begging the legislature to force insurance companies to pay 80% of the contents limits without itemizing, and the carriers pushed back so hard that we couldn't get that done. But I guarantee you, we are not finished with that issue.
No, we are not.
Next year, Amy, next year.
We are not finished. I'm with you there, Scott, 100%. You know, one of the questions in that we got here refers to the person asked about after loss. I think what they're referring to is what we call post-loss underwriting, where the insurer has said, we're happy to insure you, we're happy to insure your home and your possessions, and then after the fact, they take issue with some of the items on your list. Is that, you want to address that, Scott?
Yeah, I did speak to one of the attendees today about that, and post-loss underwriting is time. Again, that's a legal term, and Tom's really the one that needs to address it. But until we get to a point where insurance companies don't have the ability to force policyholders through the traumatic itemization of their contents, they're going to continue to do it. And you know, as far as post-loss underwriting, it's when you know, that happens more often than not when they tell you that they're not going to cover something that you've been promised in that policy document. And in Colorado, it's very important to know that within 30 days of your request in writing to the carrier or the carrier's adjuster, they must provide you with a certified copy of your policy. That will tell you exactly what kind of coverages you have, how much those coverages are, And you can read your policy yourself, and then you can read it again, and you can read it again after that, and you still won't understand it.
Okay, so we're going to go back to a question about code upgrade coverage. And I'm just going to share my screen again for a split second, so that we can tackle this for the person who asked a very general question. So code upgrade coverage is one of those buckets that hopefully you have. Now, not if you didn't have an agent or broker that recommended that you buy it, or you didn't know you should buy it and you don't have it, that is unfortunate, because even if your house was built relatively recently, it's very common that in order to get a permit to rebuild the home, you would need to upgrade some of the features of your home, electrical or plumbing or the windows. And because insurance companies insure what was there, not what you want to replace it with, they will say if you don't have code upgrade coverage, if you don't have extra coverage for the cost of improving what you had so that it's legal and you can get a permit, you got to eat that cost yourself. If you do have code upgrade coverage, then the big first challenge is figuring out how much do you have. So Chris, what is the typical amount of code upgrade coverage that you see in policies in Colorado that have that endorsement?
That's what you have on the screen, Amy. It's typically 10% of the dwelling A, or the coverage A dwelling limit. So it's a $500,000 limit. 10% of the 500,000 is 50,000, and that is for the increased costs to meet code. So you're going to have included in your rebuild the cost of the electrical lines that you had in the home. But now, what is the increased cost to meet the current code, whether it's Larimer County or Grand County or Boulder? So it's an increased cost. It's an additional coverage. It's typically 10% of your dwelling or coverage A limit. And you get paid, you get reimbursed. You must first incur it. They don't issue that up front like an ACV payment.
Scott, is that also your experience, that the insurer will not issue a check for code upgrade costs until you've incurred them, submitted proof that you incurred them?
Yeah, that's typically the language in the policy, and there are very few coverages in your policy that require you to incur the cost before the insurance company will pay it. One of them is code upgrades, and the other one is the replacement cost supplement. You have to incur that in one form or another. You can do it by buying a home in a new location. You can rebuild on the spot. One issue that's come up, and this is a legal issue, Tom should probably address this, is if you buy a home in a new location, are you still entitled to the code upgrade endorsement when the code upgrade coverage when the new house doesn't require any codes? So if you have, like Chris said, a $500,000 limit, you got a $50,000 limit for code upgrades, and you buy a $550,000 house, is the insurance company required to pay that additional $50,000 as part of your purchase price?
And my answer to that, Scott, is going to be exactly what the first words out of your mouth were tonight, which is that depends. That depends on what the policy language is. And the insurer, the insurance company argument will be no, because you have to incur it to get it to replace what was there. If you're not replacing what was there on the same site, then you don't get it. So that's going to be very, very policy dependent on the language, whether or not you can try to recover that if you replace at an alternate site. Let me also say one thing, which is what Amy has read on the screen and what's been talked about here in terms of being able to make a code upgrade or coverage claim if you don't have code upgrade coverage is true. However, and this is a big however in Colorado, there is a case in Colorado that I have successfully used in the past that stands for the proposition that if you are unable to pull a permit to rebuild and you had a house, your policy was replacement cost, but you're unable to rebuild unless you upgrade to code, there is an argument you can make that the insurance policy does provide that coverage because you had replacement cost coverage, not so-called reproduction cost coverage. You're not going to be able to get an increase to your limit. You're still going to be in the hypothetical of no code upgrade coverage. You're not going to be able to bump up your coverage A limit in order to be able to account for whatever the added cost is of code upgrade. But there is an argument that you can make. You will get pushback from the insurance company, but just be aware that there is a case out there in Colorado that you could rely on to try to base that argument.
Okay. And so just to be clear that, you know, we sort of, we don't accept that this is the way things should be, that you have to do all this math and make all these arguments and that you have to lay out all kinds of cash and then try to get paid back by your insurance company. But we don't write the rules. And so what we're doing here is trying to help you be as effective for yourself as you can within this ecosystem that insurers have created. They've written the rules, they wrote the policies, etc. And so I think, you know, obviously I'm very anxious to see Colorado get some of the benefit of some of the legal improvements we've put into place in California. And one of them is more flexibility. So I guess I want to ask flexibility on how you replace and where you replace and then and how much money the insurer will advance to you without an inventory. Chris, are you seeing any success for your clients with getting insurers to pay advances and not make everything be paid on an as incurred basis?
And I'm sorry, Amy, you talking personal property?
Anything.
Well, so to me, again, the most important thing for you to determine how best to proceed is to understand what your damages are. So again, it's your claim and you need to establish what does it cost to rebuild your home? What does it cost to replace everything in your home? That's your claim. And once you've reached agreement with the carrier as to what that amount is, then you know what your options are, or you can then determine whether or not you want to rebuild at the same location, rebuild elsewhere, or purchase something that already exists. But until you know what the carrier is going to pay, you're talking in the hypothetical world, and that's a difficult one to live with. As far as the contents go, again, same thing. You need to establish what your damages are, come up with the replacement cost value, provide the ages, and then provide what you believe is a reasonable ACV payment. And that's the basis of your claim versus allowing the carrier to suggest what it is. But again, I just want to emphasize again, carrier is obligated to work with you. This should not be an adversarial process, should not be a confrontational process, should not be an intimidation type deal. You're obligated to do the right thing. The carrier is obligated to do the right thing. And what we suggest, the most important thing is be accurate in your assessment. It's your claim. Come up with your damages are, and then try to reach agreement with the carrier on an overall claim. Personal property, ALE, other structures. I mean, this is kind of the catch-all. I apologize, but it's your claim. You need to determine what your damages are. It's best in your best interest to determine what they are, as opposed to letting the carrier suggest what your damages are.
And you know, if we could summarize if we only had one sentence to convey that the most important things to policyholders, it would probably be that, you know, it's you have the biggest stake in making sure that your assets and your loss gets valued accurately. And that's, you know, when we talk about the mindset that we encourage people to have, it's you know, that give your insurance company a chance to do the right thing, but don't be a pushover. Is sort of, I think, how we generally try to capture it. Let's go back to debris removal for a minute here. Gary asks, does the policy limit how you can go about debris cleanup? For instance, can you clean the household debris and then pause and have a structural engineer assess your foundation for viability rather than having to do everything at once, both debris cleanup and foundation removal? Let's start with Scott, and then go to Chris and Tom.
Yes. That's my answer.
Okay, good.
Now, let me get, I can go into more detail.
Better be yes.
I think it's reasonable to assume that a policyholder shouldn't have to go in and rip everything out and tear everything up and incur all these costs at one time in order to obtain those debris removal benefits. By the same token, you shouldn't assume that you're going to get that extended debris removal coverage paid until you incur the cost of that. That's part of the deal. And most policies specify that. Some don't, most policies do. So, the key is take a deep breath. And Gary and I have talked about this quite a few times. Take a deep breath, figure out how you want to do it, figure out what the state guidelines and county guidelines are for asbestos testing and abatement, and just make smart decisions on how you do that. The best thing to do is have your debris removal contractor figure out how to comply with the state and county requirements and, follow those guidelines, but you don't have to do it all at once.
Okay, actually, what I'd like to do, because we have, we're getting a bunch of questions coming in, and we're already at almost 90 minutes. And are you guys okay to stay on for another 15 minutes?
Sure.
Okay, great. So instead of having all three of you take a crack at everyone, I'm going to try to get to more of these. Okay, Richard Epstein is asking, my adjuster said the 2-year limit for rebuilding comes from state law about when you can sue the company for damages. Can you clarify? Let's start with you, Tom. Do you want me to read that again?
No, I saw it in the chat. The short answer is no, your adjuster's all wet. But the longer answer is how long you have to rebuild will be governed by what the policy says. And it's not uncommon that during mass fires like this, that it will take longer than what the policy allows. So you need to start the process early on by asking the carrier to extend that timeline so that you can take the time that you need to properly rebuild. Don't allow them to box you into a corner that by giving you a lowball number and saying now you have to rebuild, because you're going to be able to rebuild maybe 60% of what you had. So it ought to be, my argument would be that I ought to get however long your policy allows once we reach an agreement as to how much you're going to pay. But the adjuster is wrong that it's based on Colorado law, that length of time you have to sue the insurance company is not 2 years, it's 3 years. It's for breach of contract. It's 2 years for bad faith, but hopefully they don't act in bad faith from the first moment the claim happens.
What about if you're substantially underinsured and or don't have code upgrade coverage and you think that your agent or broker was at fault? How long would you have to try to hold them accountable?
Unfortunately, this is a recurring problem that happens after, or becomes highlighted, so it seems, after each of Colorado's big fires that we have. It's that people who believe that they had sufficient insurance are shocked to learn once they lose everything that in fact they did not. The time to sue a broker or an agent, or the Colorado term for it is a producer, is 2 years from the date that you learn that there was a problem. Now, I would caution you because those lawsuits are rarely won. They're exceedingly difficult to win. You have to show that your producer, that you had a quote unquote special relationship with that producer, and the standard insured agent relationship where you talk to them or you meet with them and they produce a policy for you and they only get paid through some portion of a premium that's paid, a commission off a premium. That does not create a special relationship. So the unfortunate reality is that usually there's very little remedy to trying to recover for an underinsured situation.
Okay, well, we will definitely be going more into that in the new year and doing, giving opportunities for underinsured people to participate in one of our virtual clinics with lawyer volunteers just to pursue that further. Conley, we were substantially underinsured, but the insurance company has paid policy limits on coverage A and agreed to 50% replacement value. Is there any reason to undergo the expense of getting a rebuild estimate? So that's an interesting question. So this person was substantially underinsured. So the insurer has paid limits, meaning they've maxed them out on coverage A, and they've paid them, they said they will pay an additional 50% once the home is replaced. Is there a point, we talked about how the different resources for getting a rebuild estimate, a local builder, construction estimator, a public adjuster. But should this person go to that trouble, if given what you just said, Tom, about how hard it is to win an underinsurance lawsuit?
Well, my answer, I don't know if you're directing that question to me, but my answer is if you can get to what the policy limit is and access all the different buckets of potential extra coverage that there are, simply based on, because you're so underinsured, simply based on what the insurance company has already provided to you and told you they would pay, my thought on that would be, I don't know that you need to incur that expense or incur the time to do that.
Any disagreement, either Chris or Scott?
No, I agree with that.
Okay. We also talked about I'm sorry, somebody asked a question about, I'm sorry. Oh yeah. Is it worth doing a very itemized inventory for your taxes as well? Is this inventory of contents necessary for taxes as well? Okay, this is a two-part question. I.e., is the payout subject to being taxed as income? So no, it's not taxed as income, but we say if you're underinsured, one of the few things you can do if you are not in a position to go to a lawyer and the lawyer says, oh yeah, I think I can win you a case against your broker or what have you for not selling you enough insurance, you can take a casualty loss on your income taxes as a way of somewhat offsetting that loss. So back to that question of, I assume you guys agree with me that your contents payment is not taxable, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. All right. Let's see. This may be right in there. Mike Vincent, I relied on the insurance broker to estimate a rebuild cost estimate in November of 2019 when I got a new policy. He assured me that the insurer would come inspect the home, recalculate the cost to rebuild, and if my coverages were imperfect, that the policy could be adjusted at that time. The insurer did send out an inspector who interviewed me in January of 2020 to understand all the items that added to value. Then he came toured the home, took pictures, and calculated a rebuild. October, I had a total loss. Even using the insurer's exactimate rebuild estimate, my coverage A is only 59% of their estimate to rebuild. So this person is severely underinsured. Am I likely to prevail in any case against the broker because I relied on their rebuild cost estimates and suggested policy limits? Now, of course, I'm dying to give my opinion as a lawyer, but since I have a lawyer guest, I'm going to let you give your opinion, Tom.
Well, and I'd read your question earlier, Mike, and that presents a very interesting set of facts that might be enough to tip the balance in favor of finding that there was a special relationship. Unfortunately, Colorado law is pretty darned ambiguous as to clearly delineating what is or is not a special relationship. This, I would say, probably falls into a gray area. What would be very intriguing to me is when the inspector is sent out and interviewed, what's the information that he or she transmitted back to the carrier, and what did the carrier do with it? Absolutely, now that information is never going to see the light of day, I suspect, unless you are in a lawsuit, and a lawyer like me or somebody else would be one of the first things we would do would be we would send out, we call it a litigation hold letter, but a letter to the insurance company telling them you better not destroy any information in my file, whether it's the claims file or underwriting file. Probably worth you sending out, Mike, sending an email now to your adjuster saying, if you haven't already spoken to him or her about it, hey, I thought that I understood I was going to be getting a new updated policy limit, and because there was some investigation that was done, please make sure that all that information is preserved in your files and not destroyed.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. It looks very much like there could be a special relationship on these facts. This is not a he said, she said, where you can't remember, when the conversations took place, and there was in fact an inspection. Mike also asked, I have several contradictions where my DP3 policy and endorsements describe allowances for loss of rent, loss of use, damage to other structures. The deck page shows zero coverage. Where there is a contradiction, is there any, this person might be a lawyer. He's using all these lawyer words. Can I successfully argue contra proferendum? That means that the policy should be read against the drafter. So far, the insurer Lloyd's will not speak to me, only giving me an adjuster who is not allowed to make any interpretations. Now, before you answer, Tom, as to this question, I want to address another kind of a request that we got from Gary Sanfason, who is sitting in and also is really a partner for us in this recovery effort. And Gary asked, well, what can people do to push back if they feel like they're getting treated unfairly, right? You heard me say earlier, I'm not telling you to go running, to Tom or Scott or Chris right out of the box. However, when it comes to something like this, first of all, we always say, start by being the good communicator, right? You're keeping a diary, you're keeping a journal, you're keeping track of things, you're keeping in touch with your insurance company through written communications, right? So you start by being clear in writing with what you're not happy with, whatever it is that the insurance company is doing or saying, the adjuster is saying, and then you try to go up the chain. You file a complaint with the Department of Insurance. And if none of that gets you the outcome, and again, we have lots of sample letters on our website to help you phrase those communications. Once you've tried on your own and you feel like self-help isn't working, Tom, in a situation like this one, where the the insurer will not speak to him, that they will only that they will only let him talk to an adjuster. Is there any remedy besides going to see a lawyer for this person?
Well, you can certainly go see someone like Scott or Chris, but under the law, there really isn't anything that I could point to that says, here you're violating this. What I would say though is that the Colorado Unfair Claims Practices Act, it's a statute, does state that insurance companies need to be responding in a timely manner. So what you need to do is to be, as I know UP does, advocates being politely assertive. So politely assert yourself in the email communications that you have. And my suggestion would be, hey, it seems to me 2 weeks to respond to me would be a reasonable amount of time. Do you disagree? No, I don't disagree. Okay, I'll get that to you. And then the second you hang up, you're sending a confirming email. So you're really kind of papering the file. Real quick comment on Lloyd's. You know, Lloyd's being an overseas insurer in large regard can be an issue. But just stick to it. Be patient. They will only use, we call them third-party adjusters, or they call themselves independent adjusters. They're really just, there's nothing independent about them. They work for the insurance industry, but they're not beholden to any one carrier. But absolutely, those adjusters still have to report back to the insurance company. So if you are papering your file, try to always sending emails, try to always send an email back to that adjuster and find out who's that adjuster reporting to and copy that person.
Okay, we've just got time for a couple more. Thank you so much, Tom. Okay, Scott and Chris, we've got, Susan is asking, we had a well that was not up to code and everything melted within what we had. We have code upgrade coverage. Our insurance adjuster said this will be considered part of the dwelling, but we will not be building in the same site because of erosion fears. We have plenty of land to build on, but we'll have to dig a new well. How much of this should be covered by insurance? So we're talking about the well being, is that to be considered part of the dwelling, and or is it covered separately under other structures? Let's start with you, Scott. What's your thoughts?
Well, I believe that the well's covered under other structures, unless you have enough coverage under your coverage A, and then you should be able to claim it as part of the dwelling. It's a tough issue if you move to another location, unless you have to drill a well there as well. And again, you're going to have to prove that your well was damaged by the fire. We've had this happen before, and they won't pay for, well, they ended up paying for it, but they didn't want to pay for any down well pump or anything like that, even though it was shorted out by the fire. So, you know, those are tough questions. I believe it's covered under either coverage A, if you have coverage there, or other structures, coverage B, if you have policy limits remaining there.
Anything to add, Chris?
I agree. No.
Okay. All right. When completing contents inventory, should we include the replacement cost, or should we let the insurance company estimate the replacement cost and then negotiate on what we disagree on? Let's have you hit that one, Chris.
I believe it's in your best interest to provide your own replacement cost. Oftentimes what could assist is if you include a link that reflects how you support the replacement costs. Again, language in the policy suggests it should be for like, kind, and quality. But we don't believe that it's in your best interest to allow the carrier to tell you what the replacement cost is. You need to be open to the input from the carrier, but if you're accurate, that's your claim, and that's what you want them to consider. So we believe it's in your best interest to provide your own replacement cost and support it.
That is going to bring us to pretty much the end of our session today. I know there were some questions that were asked in advance, and if we did not get to your question, first of all, a couple things I want you to know. This is definitely not the last time we're going to be with you in offering these resources. You can always you can email a question to info@uphelp.org, and we will do our best to answer. I am so grateful to Chris Rockers, Scott DeLuise, Tom Henderson, and my staff, and Gary and Lori and Joel out in Grand, for committing to being working with United policyholders in the coming year, so that we can bring this program and all the different sessions that we will be offering to you in 2021. That includes more educational workshops. The recording from tonight will be available on request to you. The slides that I showed tonight, these come from the orientation workshop that we did last week. All of these slides you can see when you watch the recording from the orientation. All of this is available. These are our previously recorded videos. All of it is available by either, if you cannot find it at uphelp.org, our website, you can email info@, and somebody from our staff will make it easy for you to find it. We encourage you to share our information with friends and neighbors. Because we don't take money from insurance companies and we're not selling anything, we are a very unique, valuable resource for you and your community. And we want to reach as many of your impacted neighbors as we can. So please help us. We're a small organization with a big mission, big hearts, and we've got a lot of big brains in the family, as you heard tonight from these gentlemen that generously shared their professional expertise with us. So again, if you didn't get your specific question answered, don't fret. We will do our best to get to it, either through an email or in our next workshop, which we will send an email out as soon as we get it scheduled, but it will be in January. So I want to again thank Chris, Tom, and Scott. Wish all of you a safe and reasonably calm holiday. We know that you're in a new normal that's beyond anything you could have imagined, but you're not the first, and you won't be the last. There are many people who are on the same road to recovery that you are. And while that may not make it less painful, we have a lot of volunteers that are living proof that there is light on the end of the tunnel, and there's a lot of support and goodwill available to you to get you through this, and you will. And how? One day at a time. It's a process. So good evening. Thank you for your time. And this is Amy Bach signing off on behalf of United Policyholders and the Roadmap to Recovery Program. Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.